This program is a presentation of University of California Television. Your support makes UCTV's programming possible. Contribute online at uctv.tv/support. Check out our YouTube original channel, UCTV Prime, at youtube.com/UCTV Prime. Subscribe today to get new programs every week.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Jack Citron, who's the director of the Institute of Governmental Studies at Berkeley, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this 5th annual Salon Banquet. We're especially honored that Senator Dick Durbin is here as the keynote speaker here today, and we're also truly privileged by the presence of Chancellor Birgeneau and Mrs. Birgeneau at this event. Chancellor's office sent me a brief bio of his, but this brief bio is actually not so brief if one is going to acknowledge all of his many accomplishments, but I want to highlight several. Robert Birgeneau became the 9th Chancellor of the University of California, Berkeley on September 22, 2004. An internationally distinguished physicist, he is a leader in higher education, and he is well known for his commitment to diversity and equity in the academic community. Before coming to Berkeley, Chancellor Birgeneau served for 4 years as president of the University of Toronto, and he previously was dean of the School of Science at MIT, where he spent 25 years on the faculty. He's a fellow of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, the Royal Society of London, the American Philosophical Society, and other scholarly societies. He has received many awards for teaching and for his research on the fundamental properties of materials. And most recently, just this year, Chancellor received the Clifford J. Schul, the Nobel Prize winner, Clifford J. Schul Prize on the Neutron Scattering Society of America. At Berkeley, in addition to being Chancellor, he holds faculty appointments in the departments of physics and material sciences and engineering. Now, in his longer bio, there are listed 425 scientific articles that he has authored or co-authored. And I wasn't impressed by that until I noticed that at least 40 of those articles were written and published after he was Chancellor of Berkeley. So that's truly an incredible accomplishment. So Chancellor Birgeneau and Mary Catherine, we're really delighted to have you here.
Of course, the science I've done since I became chancellor, the protesters would just say, see, our chancellor's wasting all his time doing science when he's supposed to be running the university. Let's get another chancellor. So thank you, Jack, and good evening, everyone, and I'm honored to be able to, both Mary Catherine and I are honored to be able to attend the 5th annual IGS Salon Gala. I think all of you know, I'm preaching to the converted here, that IGS, its programs, and its fellowships contribute greatly to Cal's vibrant academic and intellectual fabric. They also provide important campus resources to members of the campus community and the public who want to become more proactive, engaged, and empowered citizens. IGS provides a dynamic environment for students and scholars to study, discuss, and explore how government and politics can be applied to real-world issues. Of course, these valuable programs would not be possible without the help of Cal's donors and friends, like all of you here tonight. In fact, frankly, our entire university would not have been able to, what I call euphemistically, during the last 5 years, have transitioned to a new financial model. How do you like that, right? In fact, I just came from meeting with Larry Summers just a few minutes ago, and Larry was asking me, sort of, how did you manage? I said, well, Larry, you're an economist, we transitioned to a new financial model. And he laughed uproariously. Right. So I want to thank all of you because, Cal, both IGS and Cal more generally, has been able to maintain its preeminent stature and be the great university it is because of you all. I want to take a moment to especially thank Mr. William, that is Bill Brandt Jr. Bill, where are you? There, right? And his wife, Patricia Bugelis Brandt, who have underwritten this event for the third consecutive year. So thank you. And as I just said, in spite of the disinvestment by the state in public higher education, you'd think anybody capable of writing more than 400 scientific articles published in sort of all the world's best journals would figure out how not to be chancellor of a university when the investment by the state during my time period has gone from 30% to 10% of our budget. So this is, a more intelligent person would have figured out how to time it better. But in spite of all of that, we've genuinely maintained our preeminence. And we take great pride in being one of the really, truly world's great universities. And I did an alumni event in LA last night, and I made this comment that chancellors and presidents only quote rankings where their universities do well. And if you don't do well, it's because the criteria in the ranking are wrong. But I must say, I point out with pride that the London Times has their higher education supplement ranked universities around the whole world. And there's a British bias, but they said that out of their rankings came the conclusion, this just came last week, that there are 6 universities which are qualitatively better than all the rest in the country. And I'm sorry that there's not a university in Illinois included in this group, but those 6 universities were predictably Oxford and Cambridge. But interestingly, the other 4 were Harvard and MIT, Stanford and Berkeley. It's the top 6 universities in the world. And importantly, and so that's a ranking, it's a reputational ranking, and that's this year's data. So, because of IGS and all of the people here and everything we've done, in spite of this remarkable disinvestment and in spite of the predictions of the New York Times that the state of California was in a death spiral, somehow we're here, and as among public universities folks, we're still leading the world. So I want to thank all of you for that. It's now my honor to introduce tonight's featured guest, U.S. Senator Dick Durbin, Assistant Minority Leader of the U.S. Senate, and also Mr. Peter Hart over here, who will engage in a conversation entitled The State of the Nation. I know every one of you is anxiously looking forward to this. Senator Durbin, a Democratic senator from Springfield, Illinois, was elected to the U.S. Senate on November 5th, 1996. Re-elected in 2002 and 2008, Senator Durbin is the state's senior senator and convener of Illinois' bipartisan congressional delegation. He serves as the Assistant Majority Leader, which is the highest ranking position in the U.S. Senate, and has been elected to this leadership post by his Democratic colleagues every 2 years since 2006. Senator Durbin's committee membership is both impressive and comprehensive. He sits on the Senate Judiciary, Appropriations, Foreign Relations, and Rules Committee. He also serves as the chairman of the Judiciary Committee's Subcommittee on the Constitution, Civil Rights, and Human Rights, and the Appropriations Committee, Financial Services, and General Governments Committee. So this is just incredibly remarkable. My own interactions with Senator Durbin have been largely on the front of the Federal DREAM Act. I think a subset of you know that we worked passionately, not Senator Durbin, but within California on AB 130 and AB 131. And if any single person in this room doubts the importance of those 2 bills, we had a reception last week because for the first time in our history, we were able to offer financial aid to undocumented students here at Berkeley. We thought there were about 50. That was our best intelligence and our financial estimates, frankly. And it turns out so far 150 undocumented students have self-identified in order to receive financial aid. So this is a huge and critically important, and these are truly inspiring young people. And Senator Durbin has worked so hard, idealistically and passionately at the federal level in order for us to, the final step for these young people who represent the finest young Californians is that they be able to have a natural transition to obtain citizenship, and Senator Durbin has been working very hard on that, and I want to thank him personally for his incredible effort. Senator Durbin is joined tonight by Mr. Peter D. Hart. Mr. Hart is chairman of Peter D. Hart Research Associates. Hart Research Associates, a leader in survey research, have been pollsters for NBC News and the Wall Street Journal since 1989. In that time, Hart Research Associates have represented more than 40 U.S. senators and 30 governors. In addition to his role as chairman, Mr. Hart has taught public opinion and public policy at Duke University and the Annenberg School for Communication at the University of Pennsylvania. He also teaches a seminar on public opinion each spring semester at Cal and is a member of the IGS National Advisory Committee. So I want to welcome both of you and thank you for joining us this evening. And now, without further delay, it's my pleasure to welcome Senator Durbin to make his opening statement. Senator.
Chancellor's a lot taller than I am, so thank you for that kind introduction. And I want to also recognize the IGS director, Professor Jack Citron. It was good to see him this evening. Bill, and he deserves it. Bill and Patrice, great friends for a long time, and I know that they played a critical role in inviting me here, and I'm honored to be with them this evening and with you. And also Darius and Sarah, thank you for what you've done in making this IGS a reality. And special thanks to the Chancellor for being selective in telling you my life story. He left out a couple chapters, which one included losing 3 elections before I ever won one. And I finally was elected in 1982 to the U.S. House of Representatives. I came in with a new freshman by the name of Barbara Boxer. We've been friends ever since. And then in 96, as he mentioned, ran for the United States Senate. Throughout this political journey, my wife Loretta has been raising kids and keeping the home together and wondering when I'm going to come back and so forth. And I said to her one time, I said, you look back on what we've been through, all these campaigns and where we are. In your wildest dreams, did you ever think I would be in the leadership of the United States Senate? And she said, Dick, in all honesty, you're not in my wildest dreams. So I'm assuming after 44 years of marriage that she's entitled to change the channel. It's all right. I made a decision early in my life that might have affected whether you invited me to this. I was a student at St. Louis University, grew up across the river in East St. Louis, Illinois, the alma mater of Bill Brandt. And after a year of commuting back and forth across the river, I thought, man, I got to get away to school. I mean, I got to go somewhere, you know. So I went up in the library and I went through I should have been studying, went through all the catalogs looking for places to go. And I pulled out 2 catalogs. And I went home to talk it over with my mom. My father had passed away, so it was me and my mom. And I said, Mom, I think I'm going to go away to school next year. Oh, I hope you don't. Well, I think I should, Mom. How are you going to pay for it? And I said, well, I got it all figured out. I made it up. You know, I'll talk about that a little later. But she said, so where do you want to go? And I said, well, here's a catalog. This is really something. Look at this school. It's got palm trees and mountains behind it and this big mission-looking building, and it's a color photograph. It's called Stanford University. And she said, where's that? And my mom, I'll tell you a little more about her in a while. She, an immigrant lady and limited education, very smart. I said, California. She said, no way. No way. You go out there, I'll never see you again. Your brother Bob went out there to work in the aerospace industry. He never comes home. I never hear from him. Out of the question. What's the other one? I said, Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. Where's that? I said, Washington, D.C. She said, your brother works for the federal government. He goes out to Washington twice a year. He can look in on you. That was my career decision. I applied I applied to Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. If I had taken the first school, you probably wouldn't have invited me to tonight. But having said that, it is an honor to be with you, and I'm sure my mother would have been delighted if I would have chosen Cal Berkeley. As U.S. News and World Report Chancellor says, it's the best public college or university in America. So congratulations to Cal Berkeley for what you have done. Let me talk for a few moments about education and politics. Bill Moyers, a great guy and a good friend, once said, "Ideas are great arrows, but there has to be a bow. Politics is the bow of idealism." In that case, the Institute of Intergovernmental Studies may be the best archery school in America. For nearly a century, IGS has helped train smart leaders who understand that the greatness of America isn't measured simply in personal wealth, but in the strength of our commonwealth. I am personally grateful to IGS. All the skills that I need to be Majority Whip of the United States Senate I developed in the first grade. Can you count to 60? Which tends to be every day's assignment. But the person who finds out whether I have the votes and whips the issues to ask my colleagues how they're going to vote happens to be a member of the UC Berkeley class of 2002 and a former IGS student, and now my Director of Floor Operations in the United States Senate, and she's here this evening. Please say hello to Rima Dodine. Rima, where are you? I'm looking for her. There she is. You can catch her on C-SPAN almost any day. Peter's going to ask me a lot of questions, and I hope I have some answers. I want to say a word about a topic that's important to my life and yours as well. I mentioned my mother was an immigrant. She came to the United States at the age of 2 when her family moved to this country from Lithuania 101 years ago. My parents were both workers for the New York Central Railroad in East St. Louis, Illinois. Neither of them attended high school, but they made sure that my brother and I graduated from college. One reason I was able to go to college was fortuitous. It was an event that occurred on October the 4th, 1957. That was the day that the Russians launched Sputnik. It changed things dramatically. For the first time since the GI Bill after World War II, the federal government decided that we were going to make certain that we educated the leaders of tomorrow, the scientists, engineers, and other college graduates. And so they created something called the National Defense Education Act. How many people here are products of the National Defense Education Act? A few of us in the audience. This Education Act, as it was written, said, quote, "No student of ability will be denied an opportunity for higher education because of financial need." How about that? To keep that promise, the federal government provided low-interest loans to people like me. The National Defense Student Loan Program put me through college and law school. By the time I graduated law school, my wife and I had a baby and another one on the way, and then there was the day of reckoning. They added up all the loans and called me into the student loan office and said, "Well, Durbin, here it is." And they handed me a letter, and it turned out that my total indebtedness from the federal government and all sources for my college and law school education was a staggering $8,500. And a year after graduation, I had to start paying it back at 3% annual interest, payments over 10 years. I didn't believe I would ever be able to do it, seriously. And I said to my wife, we better start saving up because I've got 2 years to make that first payment. Well, I did pay it back, and lots of students did. And I happen to believe that it not only made a difference in my life and perhaps in the life of America, but it made a difference for a lot of people. Because you see, that was the beginning of the democratization of higher education. From 1962, when I started college, through 1976, I finished before then, incidentally, college enrollment in America increased by 174%. We trained a generation of scientists and engineers and other leaders to help face our problems in America. Now, fast forward to today. My indebtedness of $8,500 represented a little more than half of my starting income as a lawyer out of law school. I was paid $15,000 a year. Now look at what schools are facing. The same Georgetown Law School that I attended, which I believe the tuition was about $1,200 a year, is now $50,000 a year. And as a consequence, we're seeing more and more students taking on dramatic amounts of debt. There was an event which occurred in October of 2010, which was not noted by many. For the first time in the history of the United States of America, the sum total of student loan debt surpassed credit card debt in the United States. Student loan debt is different than many other debts. It is not dischargeable in bankruptcy. It will follow you to the grave. And when I asked the federal government agencies responsible for it, do you have any questions about student loan defaults and so forth? Kind of smugly, they say, no, eventually we'll get our money. It may be the income tax refund that they think is coming their way. It may be some other source, but we'll get our money. That happens to be the good side of student debt. That's the 3.4% debt that is also pegged to your income in terms of repayment and can be forgiven if you take up certain occupations, nursing, engineering, and teaching, things like that. But there's another side to debt for students, private loans, which sadly have interest rates of 18% and no forgiveness. I have invited students from across the United States to send me their stories to my official website, and I tell these stories on the floor of the U.S. Senate about what these students are facing. It is incredible to think what they face. Indebtedness sometimes over $100,000, many of them for worthless diplomas from for-profit schools. Some of them going $50,000 and $60,000 in debt to take up not even a course that leads to an academic diploma. I wish they would take the cooking shows off television for a little while, because these students are going to culinary schools. Le Cordon Bleu, pretty impressive, huh? Well, it's about $54,000 in tuition for a 2-year course to become a cook at a restaurant. And the students are signing up, and the debt is there for them and the person who co-signs the loan. And it turns out recently there was a report, the first I had read, of a grandmother whose Social Security check is being garnished because she guaranteed her granddaughter's loan for college, and her granddaughter defaulted. Now the grandmother will have it taken out of her Social Security check. It's almost indescribable to think that we have reached this point. The student loan debt is going to affect whether that student will ever be able to go on to school anyplace else, buy their first home, maybe even buy a car, all affected by indebtedness. Decisions being made by young people at the age of 19 and 20, which will literally impact the rest of their lives. One of the things I think we have to do is, at least in the area of private loans, they managed 5 years ago to get special treatment in the bankruptcy bill so that private loans, student loans, are not dischargeable in bankruptcy either. There's some people here in the bankruptcy business, and I can tell you that made these loans golden. It is a treatment of a private debt, the likes of which no other private debt is treated. The only things, as I remember from my courses in law school, that are not dischargeable in bankruptcy are alimony and child support and taxes and federal student loans. Well, this private industry got in and said, we're going to add in private student loans. I think it's time to take a look at that. I think that is an outrage. It is an indebtedness which should not be allowed to continue, and I have some legislation I'm working on. Having said that, I have fond memories of the University of California system in the 50s and 60s, when there was literally no debt associated with college. It was an amazing system of higher education, the envy of the rest of the United States. And I know, as the chancellor said, in his state, your state of California, in my state of Illinois, financial support for higher education has been flagging. There's just not enough money to go around. And they're trying to make up the difference in public colleges in the state of Illinois. I know what you've done here because I've read about it before I came. I understand that 40% of all UC Berkeley undergraduates pay no tuition, and fewer UC Berkeley students take out loans than the national average. And students here who do borrow significantly less than the national average. I want to congratulate you on your State DREAM Act, and I think that Peter is going to bring that up in a moment. But think about the conversation that just took place during the presidential primary about higher education. Yes, it was a former member of the United States Senate who happens to have a law degree who suggested that going to college was an example of snobbery. It also was during the course of that campaign that a major candidate said with a straight face, we should eliminate federal aid to education. Eliminate it. And you think about the impact that would have, students like myself and others who depend on this to be able to go to school. That's a suggestion we haven't heard in a long time in America, and I hope it's one that doesn't come to pass. Now we have a budget fight going on in Washington. Peter will talk about that later in the course of questions and answers here. I was a member of the Simpson-Bowles Commission, created by President Obama, 18 of us, 12 members of Congress, House and Senate, Democrats and Republicans, equally divided, 6 public members. Our goal was to come up with a way to reduce the deficit of the United States over the next 10 years by at least $4 to $5 trillion. It was an ambitious undertaking, and I thought that the Commission's report was a good one. What it suggested was we would put everything on the table. I mean, everything. We are talking about not only discretionary spending in domestic areas, but defense spending as well. We were talking about entitlement programs and revenue. We say revenue now so that Republicans won't leave the room, but that's known as taxes. So we ended up deciding it would be a 3-to-1 ratio, spending cuts to revenue, and I voted for it. And a lot of people were surprised because I come from a part of the political spectrum they didn't expect me to vote that way. But I look at it this way. I don't think you have to be wasteful to be liberal. I don't think wasting money on any program is defensible. This is hard-earned money from taxpayers across America. We should spend it wisely. I also believe that when we talk about budget priorities for the next 10 years, there are several things that are important to me and I hope will be important to any package. One of those is a progressive income tax system, which I think is reasonable and fair, and those who do well in America should thank the Lord that they are in this great nation and be willing to pay a little more for that experience and that opportunity. The second thing is a safety net, a basic safety net, because we know in our human experience there will be people with mental, physical disabilities or just plain bad luck who will need a helping hand. That's going to happen, and we've got to be there. We also know that we have to invest in some things that will provide for our future. Let's start with education, which we all, of course, respect very much. It goes beyond that. It goes into research. I don't have to tell the folks at Cal Berkeley about how important research is. I understand you have 25 Nobel Prizes at the school since 1995 and more national science medals, Pulitzer Prizes, MacArthur Genius Awards, and other prestigious accolades that many institutions can even consider. And that's a great record. Incentivizing research at every level is critical to innovation, it's critical to new products, it's critical to job growth and business growth in America. I recently was the commencement speaker at the Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago. When it came time to give the graduate degrees, it was a struggle because the person who was calling out the names had to try to figure out how to pronounce all of the Asian names that were on the list. Many of them multiple degrees, and the PhD candidates the same. I spoke the following year to a major Chicago law school where the graduate degrees, half of them at the law school, went to Chinese students. We are seeing more and more students from all over the world coming to the United States because of the quality of the education that we offer. That's good for them. It's probably very good for their own countries, but we have to ask ourselves a question. Are we producing enough of our own? Are we growing our own in terms of talent that will keep the American economy moving forward and create opportunities in this nation, as well as those who are studying and may take their lessons to another place on earth? Those who say we have to cut education insist that we have no choice. I think they ought to remember history. Let me give you a couple examples, and one of them involves a fellow that we always talk about if you're from Illinois. It was 150 years ago that Lincoln was struggling in the Civil War to preserve the Union, but a political opportunity presented itself that he couldn't have anticipated. When the Southerners left over the issue of slavery, they were able to consider national issues of importance, and the remainder of Congress enacted programs that had a profound impact on the future of America. The creation of the Transcontinental Railroad happened during that period of time of the Civil War. And also, the Morrill Land-Grant Colleges. That was, as they call them, democracy's colleges. UC Berkeley was one of them, creating an opportunity for states to create institutions of higher learning that would benefit that state for generations to come. Even during the darkest days of the Civil War, there was enough vision to see the need for research and education for America's future. What happened after World War II? America's national debt exceeded 100% of our gross domestic product for the first time in our history. I'm sure there were voices which said, cut spending. Instead, we passed the GI Bill. And what happened in America? We created a generation of college graduates and leaders that made the 20th century literally the American century. It's an investment at a time when some would have said, you shouldn't have done it. We did it, and we reap the benefits even to this day. Let me stop at this point and call up here a person who is a friend of mine, and I'll tell you how much he's a friend of mine. Peter Hart and his partner, Jeff Guerin, have done all of my polling throughout all of my successful campaigns for Congress and the Senate. So I have a very high regard for Peter and his professional expertise, and I hope you will now welcome to the stage Peter D. Hart. Come on up, Peter.
And let's hear it for Senator Durbin and his remarks. Great humor and really well done. I'll tell you, I've had an awful lot of assignments through a lifetime, but I've never felt more pressure than I feel right now. To be perfectly honest, it's been a long and very fruitful relationship that my partner and I have had with Senator Durbin, and in 15 minutes, I can destroy a beautiful relationship. So, Senator, of the many brilliant things you've done, which is the greatest? I want to ask a few tough hardball questions like that. Let's start a conversation, and probably the best place to start is where you were talking about the budget. It is so caught up, everything that's been happening, and you go back to the Simpson Bowles moment in time, and it seems like a time that was just missed, both by the administration and by the Congress. What happened? Why did it happen? Can we sort of recapture that moment? How do we go out of this?
I think it can be recaptured. And there are 8 senators now, 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans, I'm one of them, who sit together and try to take the Simpson-Bowles model and convert it into legislation. We've been working at this for over a year. It's not easy. And circumstances keep changing, in the meantime. So we're working with Erskine Bowles and Alan Simpson to try to bring this into a meaningful piece of legislation. Now, come December 31st of this year, there will be something called the cliff. And the cliff is an ominous situation that faces us where on December 31st, all of the Bush tax cuts will expire. The sequestration order will go into effect to cut $600 billion in spending on the defense side, $600 billion on the non-defense side, over the next 10 years. At the same time, we will see the expiration of the payroll tax cut, which reduces the taxes collected by 2% for workers across America, an effort to bring us out of this recession. We will see the end of the alternative minimum tax, which now affects 4 million Americans. It will grow end of the exemption, I should say, it will grow to some 40 million Americans over the next 20 years, if not changed. At the same time, we will find the family child tax credit cut in half, and we will see an expiration of the debt ceiling, which, as you remember, had us all tied up in knots not that long ago. Those are just a few of the things that would happen. It would result, if we did nothing but let that happen, it would result in more deficit reduction over the next 10 years than any group has come up with. It'd be almost $7 trillion if we just said, okay, that's what'll happen. We won't change it. But the economists say we may not be so lucky, because if we impose higher taxes coming out of recession, it'll be a drag on the economy and will reduce economic growth. Now, there are plenty of arguments within the things I've said. Some who would argue you shouldn't let taxes go up on the wealthy. Others who will argue you can't impose higher taxes on people in lower and middle income groups. All of this is coming to a head December 31st. So the obvious response from most people is, well, you're going to be pretty busy after the election. You're going to have less than 2 months to make sure that doesn't happen. My response to that is, if the result of the election is no change politically, in terms of what you see today, it is possible that the lame duck session will be used to solve the problem. And maybe they'll turn to the Gang of Eight and use it as a template. But if there is any change in the House, in the Senate, in the White House, somebody's going to say it is to our advantage to wait. Wait until the new president and new Congress come in. And that delays the decision process. So we are faced with, I think, a terrible situation. And we hope that this Gang of Eight will have produced the Simpson-Bowles measure as a starting point, a bipartisan starting point, to reach a solution. I hope we can at that point.
But what makes you think that a Senate after the election can do something like this? I mean, everything seems so ground down into this political partisanship. How do we move beyond it? Is it possible to move beyond it? We can talk about all the problems and 60 and everything else, but what's going to allow us to get through this, and how does the election play into it?
Well, of course, the election will have a lot to do with it. I know this president better than most. My wife and I invited Barack and Michelle out to dinner before they had children. So we've known him for a long time. And, of course, campaigned for him and encouraged him to run for president. I believe, in my conversations with him, and I think he said as much publicly, he's committed to this deficit reduction. He and Simpson-Bowles wanted to see us through this recession before we started on what we need to do, we have to do. When we borrow 40 cents for every dollar we spend, whether it's on food stamps or missiles, it is unsustainable. That has to change. What he has said, and I agree with, is revenue has to be part of this. You just can't do it with spending cuts. That's what Paul Ryan has done with his budget. Now, 41 of the 47 Republican senators have signed the Grover-Norquist oath. I wish they hadn't, but they did. They felt they had to. And so every time we talk about revenue or taxes, many of them get very nervous. What would happen to a senator who violated the Norquist oath? The Club for Growth would come in and try to beat him. Ask, Dick Lugar in Indiana, what's going on right now. He's up by 4 points in his race for re-election against a Club for Growth candidate who is trying to defeat him in Indiana because he's too liberal for that state. So these Republicans live in that fear. My only hope is that because they look at the possibilities if we do nothing in terms of tax increases, that they may be able to strike a political bargain and find some way of producing revenue. Now let's go to my side of the ledger, where you're going to find the most grief from Democrats. Entitlement programs, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. Understandably, these are programs created by Democratic presidents, which I happen to believe are of great value to this country, the safety net we talked about earlier. Social Security, untouched, unchanged, no amendments, not a word, will make every promised payment with a cost of living adjustment for the next 25 years. You can't say that about any other program in Washington. On the 26th year, things get pretty bad. There's a 30% fall off in terms of the money available. We don't want that to occur. Medicare, untouched, unchanged, will make every promised payment, we think, for 12 years. Only 12 years. So doing something today, I think, frankly, in both of these areas, Social Security and Medicare, is imperative. And I say that as someone who believes passionately in both of these programs. I was around in '83 when Social Security went bust. I just arrived in the House, and we bought in Social Security basically 50 or 60 years of solvency with the changes we made. We raised the retirement age to 67, phased it in. We raised the payroll tax. We taxed some Social Security benefits for people in higher income categories. Any one of those is a killer 30-second ad. But we did it together, and we did it bipartisan, and no one lost the election because of it. Now we've got to attack Social Security and Medicare the same way. Last point I'll make, Peter, is that Danny Inouye, who's chairman of the Appropriations Committee, took a look at the last time we balanced the budget. It was the end of the Clinton administration. The last time we balanced the federal budget, which surprises some people, but it happened for more than 1 year. Since that time, when the budget was in balance, here is what's happened. Domestic discretionary spending on things like education and research and maintaining government, domestic discretionary spending is flat. When you take in constant dollars into consideration, there's been no increase in the last 10 or 12 years in spending. In fact, it's gone down recently. We cut $1 trillion over a 10-year period. When it comes to entitlement programs, since the last time we balanced the budget, they've gone up 30%. That's a lot. When it comes to defense spending, it's gone up almost 80% in that period of time. Now, I will put a little asterisk at the end of it here. The demographics on entitlement programs, we've got to be honest about them. Every day since January 1st of last year, 10,000 Americans reached the age of 65, and that will continue for 18 more years. These are people who have paid in Social Security and Medicare, and now say, it's our turn. Understandable, right? Well, that tells me that when we look at the long term of this program, we're going to have added cost. And we have got to find out a way to start bringing down the growth rate in that cost to keep Medicare solid.
Two questions related to that, and we're going to go to the audience in a second. The real pressure on us is if we don't get to dinner, we don't get out on time, and that's the only great fear we have. So two questions sort of come out of this. First and foremost, how do you make the electorate sort of rise to a higher level so that in terms of looking at the process, they're asking more of us who are in Congress, of you who are in Congress? And secondly, how do you change the rules? Are we going to be stuck with 60? Are we always going to be stuck with this sort of partisan gridlock? Can you ever sort of put the genie back in the bottle, or are we gone?
Well, I've been around for a little while, and there are two or three things, and you and I spoke about one of them earlier, that we, I think, both agree need to be done. I served in the House for 14 years. I was the beneficiary of a partisan reapportionment map. That's how I got to Congress. They drew a map that was sweet for me, and I beat a 22-year Republican incumbent by 1,000 votes or something. It's pretty close. But I had my chance with this new map. 10 years later, tables turned, and they tried to beat me. The Republicans, Denny Hastert, drew a map, and they didn't quite get the job done. I ended up getting reelected. I think that this has really corrupted the process. I really believe that this partisan reapportionment should come to an end everywhere. Now, it's going to be the states that have to decide this. It isn't a federal matter as I see it. But I think we need to really open up this so that we have more change from time to time in these seats, and an opportunity for people who are elected who don't have an overwhelmingly Democratic or an overwhelmingly Republican district. That's what I would do on the House side. On the Senate side, the filibuster situation has to change. I could give you statistics, which Rima wrote up for me here, but I won't read them to you, other than tell you there has been a dramatic increase in filibusters and 60-vote requirements. It now is standard in the United States Senate. It used to be extraordinary, unusual, exceptional. Now it is a standard. This has to change. Let me give you a couple changes that I think will not violate the idea of the Senate protecting minorities, but would be reasonable. If I want to stand up in the Senate and stop the business of the Senate, historically, until about 1920, one senator could do it, no questions asked. That's the end of it. Nothing moves forward. Woodrow Wilson had produced a bill sent to the Congress asking to arm the merchant marine because of U-boat attacks, German attacks on our merchant marine fleet. The Peace Caucus in the Senate, which included Republicans and Democrats, objected to it and stopped the bill. Woodrow Wilson said that is an outrage, that you won't even take the bill up in the United States Senate, and he forced the requirement into the Senate rules that it would take, with a two-thirds vote, 67 votes, or two-thirds at the time, 67 today, that you could stop the filibuster. Cloture, motion for cloture, 67 votes. Fast forward 50 years now, we're in the mid-60s. We're in the middle of the civil rights debate. This has gone on forever. And finally, they break the deadlock, pass the civil rights bill, and amend the Senate rules and bring 67 down to 60. But it takes 60 senators to stop the filibuster. Here's what I think. I don't think you ought to be able to stand up and say, I'm going to stop the business of the Senate and I'm going to dinner. I'll see you in a couple days. If it's important enough to stop the business of the Senate, park your fanny in that chair on the Senate floor and stay there. If it's that important, and if you need to go somewhere, have somebody else take that chair over. And stay there around the clock if you need to. Show your commitment that this is so important, we're going to stop the business of the Senate. And instead of my producing 60 votes to overcome this opposition, we'll have a roll call to see if you can produce 40 votes to support your position for a filibuster. You're respecting the 60-vote margin, but I think you're putting the burden where it belongs, on the person that wants to stop the business of the Senate. The last point I'll make to you when it comes to reform is one that affects the House and the Senate and the presidency and the future of this country. Citizens United has created an unholy mess in this country. When a Las Vegas casino magnate worth $200 billion can decide that he will personally sponsor a candidate for President of the United States, and does, by sending millions and millions of dollars into the process, something's wrong. The same thing occurred with a fellow from Wyoming who decided he wanted to pick another candidate, who kept going until the middle of this week when he dropped out. This process now, this super PAC process, is a complete corruption of what the law had been in the United States for decades, which basically allowed us to try to contain some spending. McCain-Feingold, remember that? Try to contain some of the spending and to limit the expenditures from individuals and corporations and unions for that matter. Here comes the Supreme Court, strict constructionists as they are, and overturn all this precedent and say, no, it's wide open, it's free speech, spend what you want. I will tell you that I don't know how mere mortals who even aspire to run for the House and the Senate could look at this and think this is a good idea. If you are not individually wealthy, you're going to have a super PAC that is going to swamp you. I had lunch today across the bay with Sherrod Brown. He's our incumbent senator in Ohio, up for re-election. So far in his race, in Claire McCaskill's race in Missouri, and John Tester's race in Montana, each of them has had $5 million in negative advertising on television already spent. They've not spent the first penny on television. And that is what this is about, and it's April. It's April. So I have a public financing bill. I have no Republican co-sponsors. The last one I had was Arlen Specter, and then he came over on my side of the aisle, so that was the end of that. But if we don't move towards some form of financing campaigns that take big money and special interest out of the picture, it's not going to create a positive environment for bipartisan solutions in Washington.
Let me close with the short question, and then we'll go to Q&A from the audience. But short question is, you started out and you talked about the National Defense Education Act and how it changed your life. Will there be a time, a generation, 2 generations from now, where there will be somebody talking about the DREAM Act and the chance that we will be talking about citizens who indeed had a chance and a possibility? How does that happen? What's involved in it? Where do you see it?
Well, if you could bear with me for a minute, and Chancellor, I don't know if you've heard this story, but here's how it started. There was a phone call to my office from a woman in Chicago who was Korean American, who owned dry cleaners. Not surprising, about 85% of the dry cleaners in Chicago were owned by Korean families. And she said that she had a question for me. She was married and had 3 children, and her daughter, her oldest daughter, had been brought to America at the age of 2 on a visitor's visa. The mother had given birth to her brother and sister in America. They were citizens. The mother in 1985 became a citizen herself. Her father was a citizen. But they never filed any papers for their daughter. And the reason why she called was her daughter had just graduated from high school, and she was part of something in Chicago called the Merit Music Program, which went to help struggling young people learn how to play musical instruments. Her daughter turned out to be a genius at the piano, and she had been accepted at the Juilliard School of Music and the Manhattan Conservatory of Music, and filling out the applications, said to her mom, "What do I put down here for nationality?" Her mom said, "I don't know. I'd never filed any papers for you once you got here." Her daughter said, "What are we going to do?" And her mom said, "We're going to call Durbin." So they called me, and we checked in the law, and the law was very clear. the girl had to leave the United States for 10 years and apply to come back in. And it would likely take another 10 years or so for her to get a chance for a green card. And I thought to myself, that isn't right. And I put in this bill that said if you came here as a child, good moral character, graduate high school, finish at least 2 years of college, or serve in the military, you'll be on a path to citizenship. It may be 10 years down the line. That's the DREAM Act. At the time when I first introduced it, I had to fight with Orrin Hatch because he said, well, that was my idea. So it became the Hatch-Durbin bill. It's no longer the Hatch-Durbin bill. He doesn't vote for it anymore. We have two sitting Republicans who vote for the DREAM Act. Dick Lugar of Indiana, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. That's it so far. This means more to me than I can tell you. I mean, I've been through Congress for a long time. I've been involved in a lot of issues that mean a lot to me. But when I first started this, and I'd give these little talks in Chicago about the DREAM Act, if I gave it at night and went out to my car, inevitably there would be a young person standing in the dark who would say to me, Senator Durbin, I'm one of those kids. Well, times have changed. Those kids are now coming forward. They're telling their stories. I'm telling their stories on the floor of the United States Senate. And they're amazing stories, as Chancellor said, heroic stories of young people who have no country. They have no place to go. They can't be licensed engineers and doctors and lawyers. They have no country. And I'm not going to give up on it. And I would say, Peter, I can't tell you what the chances are, but we're going to keep pushing. I can't tell you how many Republicans come to me and privately say, man, I know you're right. I hope we can get to this one thing. One guy said to me, I can't vote for you, but I'm going to pray for you. He said, thanks for the prayers. Well, let me tell you the end of the story about this young Korean girl. She ended up going to the Manhattan Conservatory of Music. She ended up marrying an American and becoming an American citizen, and she ended up playing in Carnegie Hall. So that's 10 or 11 years later. There are a lot of stories like that out there, and we just have to give them that chance, and they are going to make this a better country.
Nice story. Thank you. So we got a couple questions from the audience, and I know we're short on time.
Yes, please raise your hands.
Hi, my name's Hugh Levine. I probably embarrass myself because I'm not a political scientist. I'm just a criminal defense lawyer. But to go back to cloture, when Obama was elected and the Democrats had a majority in both houses and were holding a lot of cards, it's my understanding the first order of business for Congress is to enact its rules. Why wasn't a simple majority rule enacted at that time that might have saved us all this trouble?
I'll give you an honest answer. It wasn't enacted because we had just come off a period of time when we had 45 votes in the Senate. And I was the whip during that period of time. And our job was to use the filibuster on our side of the aisle. In the Senate, you're always thinking, what about 2 years from now? Can you live with what you've just passed as a rule if everything flips? And that's why the suggestion that I made about the filibuster didn't eliminate the 60 vote requirement, or at least the 60 vote threshold, but came at it from a different way. Mine was not an original suggestion. We have had Tom Udall of New Mexico, Mark Udall, and a number of others, Jeff Merkley of Oregon, who have been working on these changes. I think that that will be enough of a change to discourage the abuse of filibuster, but will still not eliminate it as part of the institution. And perhaps more will have to be done at some later time. But it is the fear that in the next election cycle, you'll be in the minority that has protected the filibuster to this point.
Questions?
More questions? Speak into the mic.
Hi, my name is Kayla Unger. I'm an undergraduate studying political science at UC Berkeley. I'm actually in Peter Hart and Professor Citron's class on public opinion right now. And my question is about the DREAM Act. I'm wondering what the best way you think about going to the American public and garnering support, because I think it does have support on both sides of the aisle, particularly with young people. It's a good rallying point. And then for Peter Hart, if you've done any polling on the DREAM Act, and if you have any numbers that you think could show that there is widespread support in the American public.
I'll say a word first. I met several weeks ago the widow of Steve Jobs, Lorene Powell Jobs, And she came to the office, and she's taken a special interest in this. And she said she wants to help me. Well, great, glad to have her help. And she engaged Luntz, the Republican pollster, to find out what's the problem with Republicans. What's your problem here? Well, for some, it is just basic. They don't like immigrants, all right? And that is not new in America. You know, after the Mayflower landed, the next boat, I'm sure, had people saying, not more of those people, you know. That's been going on forever. But the second part was, they think it's an entitlement. Wait a minute, I don't have the American dream. Why does this kid get the American dream, you know? So they suggested talking about earning your way to legal status and citizenship. Change the words a little bit. And how are they going to earn it? Set out the requirements. You know, learning English, paying their taxes, finishing school, so forth and so on. So we have to work on that aspect of it to move it forward. I would tell you, though, that in terms of where we go with it, there are a couple things. I had the first Dream Sabbath last year. I decided to go back to my college experience with civil rights and try to energize religious groups around America to get behind the DREAM Act. This is a big leap for many of them, you know, to get engaged in that kind of political issue. And it was interesting. The Catholic Church stepped right up. You would think that 40% of the members of the American Catholic Church were Hispanic, wouldn't you? And they are. And so they are behind this. They like this notion, and they are pushing it and doing a good job at it. The evangelicals came. There are large numbers of Hispanic evangelicals, and they've come forward as a group. So we're starting to get some movement in a non-political fashion toward making this an issue of conscience rather than just another political issue. And I will tell you, too, the last point I'll make here, telling the stories of each one of these students is so critical. Once you humanize this, once you put a face on it, I was telling the chancellor that the drum major for the USC Trojan marching band is undocumented. And there he was in full regalia, standing there with his baton, and I had his picture on the floor of the United States Senate. And I said, this is a DREAM Act student, you know, and he's majoring in engineering or something. So as you tell these stories about these young people and these students and humanize it, I think it improves our chances. And last point, this is your world, the Hispanic vote now is breaking 5-1 for Obama.
That is correct.
Because of statements made by Mitt Romney that he would veto the DREAM Act and other statements during the course of the campaign. They cannot really believe that they can continue on as a major political party and write off Hispanics. Wasn't there a Republican governor in this state that tried to do it once?
All I can say is I thought Senator Durbin was so deft in terms of his political abilities, but when he comes to an audience and brags about thinking about Stanford and finishes talking about the USC Trojans, obviously he doesn't understand how we think up here in Northern California. I have to say, it is a true honor, and Bill, thank you for helping to make this happen. Patrice, you can see why we value and appreciate not only the abilities and the insights, but the humanity and the sense of character that you bring to the United States Senate. So I thank you ever so much.
Thank you.